It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I want you to get up right now. Get up, go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be at Sanctuary, this great institution, which I hope you all support and cherish. My old office in Gaza is a pile of rubble. The streets around it, where I went for coffee, ordered maftoul or manakish, had a haircut, are flattened. Friends and colleagues are dead, or more often have vanished. Last heard from weeks or months ago, no doubt buried somewhere under the broken slabs of concrete. The uncounted dead in the tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands. Gaza is now a wasteland of 50 million tons of rubble and debris. Rats and dogs scavenge amid the ruins and fetid pools of raw sewage. The putrid stench and contamination of decaying corpses rises from beneath the mountains of shattered concrete. There is no clean water, little food, a severe shortage of medical services, and hardly any habitable shelters. Palestinians risk death from unexploded ordnance left behind after over 15 months of airstrikes, artillery barrages, missile strikes, and blasts from tank shells, and a variety of toxic substances, including pools of sewage and asbestos. Hepatitis A caused by drinking contaminated water is rampant, as are respiratory ailments, scabies, malnutrition, starvation, and the widespread nausea and vomiting caused by eating rancid food. The vulnerable, including infants and the elderly, along with the sick, face a death sentence. Some 1.9 million people have been displaced, amounting to 90% of the population. They live in makeshift tents, encamped amid slabs of concrete or in the open air. Many have been forced to move over a dozen times. 9 in 10 homes have been destroyed or damaged. Apartment blocks, schools, hospitals, bakeries, mosques, universities. Israel blew up Isra University in Gaza City in a controlled demolition. Cemeteries, shops, and offices have been obliterated. The unemployment rate is 80%, and the gross domestic product has been reduced by almost 85%, according to an October 2024 report issued by the International Labor Organization. Israel's banning of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, which estimates that clearing Gaza of the rubble left behind will take 15 years, and blockage of aid trucks into Gaza ensures that Palestinians in Gaza will not have access to basic humanitarian supplies, food, and services. The United Nations Development Program estimates that it will cost between $40 billion and $50 billion to rebuild Gaza, and will take, if the funds are made available, until 2040. It would be the largest post-war reconstruction effort since the end of World War II. Israel supplied with billions of dollars of weapons from the US, Germany, Italy, and the UK created this hell. It intends to maintain it. Gaza is to remain under siege. Gaza's infrastructure will not be restored. Its basic services, including water treatment plants, electricity, and sewer lines, will not be repaired. Its destroyed roads, bridges, and farms will not be rebuilt. Desperate Palestinians will be forced to choose between living like cave dwellers, camped out amid jagged chunks of concrete, dying in droves from disease, famine, bombs, and bullets, or permanent exile. These are the only options Israel offers. And Israel is convinced, perhaps correctly, that eventually life in the coastal strip will become so onerous and difficult, especially as Israel finds excuses to violate the ceasefire and resume armed assaults on the Palestinian population, that a mass exodus will be inevitable. It has refused, even with the ceasefire in place, to permit foreign press into Gaza, a ban designed to blunt coverage of the horrendous suffering and mass death. Stage 2 of Israel's genocide and the expansion of Greater Israel, which includes the seizing of more Syrian territory in the Golan Heights, as well as calls for expansion to Damascus, southern Lebanon, Gaza, and the occupied West Bank, where some 40,000 Palestinians have now been driven from their homes, is being cemented into place. Israeli organizations, including the far-right Nakala organization, have held conferences to prepare for Jewish colonization of Gaza once Palestinians are ethnically cleansed. Jewish-only colonies existed in Gaza for 38 years until they were dismantled in 2005. Washington and its allies in Europe do nothing to halt the live-streamed genocide, and they will do nothing to halt the wasting away of Palestinians in Gaza from hunger, disease, and bombs, and their eventual depopulation. They are partners in this genocide, and they will remain partners until the genocide reaches its grim conclusion. But the genocide in Gaza is only the start. The world is breaking down under the onslaught of the climate crisis, which is triggering mass migrations, failed states, and catastrophic wildfires, hurricanes, storms, flooding, and droughts. As global stability unravels, industrial violence, which is decimating the Palestinians, will become ubiquitous. These assaults will be committed, as they are in Gaza, in the name of progress, Western civilization, and our supposed virtues, to crush the aspirations of those mostly poor people of color who have been dehumanized and dismissed as human animals. Israel's annihilation of Gaza marks the death of a global order guided by internationally agreed upon laws and rules, ones often violated by the U.S. in its imperial wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, but ones that were at least acknowledged as a utopian vision. The U.S. and its Western allies have not only supplied the weaponry to sustain the genocide, but obstruct the demand by most nations for an adherence to humanitarian law. The message this sends is clear. We have everything, and if you try and take it away from us, we will kill you. The militarized drones, helicopter gunships, walls and barriers, checkpoints, coils of concertina wire, watchtowers, detention centers, deportations, brutality and torture, denial of entry visas, apartheid existence that comes with being undocumented, loss of individual rights, and electronic surveillance are as familiar to the desperate migrants along the Mexican border or attempting to enter Europe as they are to the Palestinians. Israel, which as Ronan Bergman notes in his book Rise and Kill First, has assassinated more people than any other country in the Western world, employs the Nazi Holocaust to sanctify its hereditary victimhood and justify its settler colonial state, apartheid, campaigns of mass slaughter, and Zionist version of Lebensraum. Primo Levi, who survived Auschwitz, saw the Shoah for this reason as, quote, an inexhaustible source of evil, which, he wrote, is perpetuated as hatred in the survivors and springs up in 1,000 ways against the very will of all, as a thirst for revenge, as moral breakdown, as negation, as weariness, as resignation. For genocide and mass extermination are not the exclusive domain of fascist Germany. Adolf Hitler, as Ami Césaire writes in Discourse on Colonialism, appeared exceptionally cruel only because he presided over the humiliation of the white man. But the Nazis, he writes, had simply applied colonialist procedures, which until then had been reserved exclusively for the Arabs of Algeria, the coolies of India, and the blacks of Africa. The German mass slaughter of the Herero and Namakwa, the Armenian genocide, the Bengal famine of 1943, then British Prime Minister Winston Churchill airily dismissed the deaths of 3 million Indians in the famine, or Hindus in the famine, by calling them, quote, a beastly people with a beastly religion, along with the dropping of nuclear bombs on the civilian targets of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, illustrate something fundamental about Western civilization. The moral philosophers who make up the Western canon, Immanuel Kant, Voltaire, David Hume, John Stuart Mill, and John Locke, as Nicole Fleetwood points out, excluded enslaved and exploited people, indigenous peoples, colonized peoples, women of all races, and the criminalized from their moral calculus. In their eyes, European whiteness alone imparted modernity, moral virtue, judgment, and freedom. This racist definition of personhood played a central role in justifying colonialism, slavery, the genocide of Native Americans, our imperial projects, and our fetish for white supremacy. So when you hear, as you will with many in the Trump administration, that the Western canon is an imperative, ask yourself, an imperative for whom? In America, the poet Langston Hughes said, Negroes do not have to be told what fascism is in action. We know. Its theories of Nordic supremacy and economic suppression have long been realities to us. The Nazis, when they formulated the Nuremberg laws, modeled them on our Jim Crow-era segregation and discrimination laws, our refusal to grant citizenship to Native Americans and Filipinos, although they lived in the U.S. and U.S. territories, was copied to strip citizenship from Jews. Our anti-miscegenation laws, which criminalized interracial marriage, was the impetus to outlaw marriages between German Jews and Aryans. And American jurisprudence, which determined who belonged to which race and classified anyone with 1% of black ancestry, the so-called one-drop rule, as black, was copied by the Nazis, with the Nazis, ironically, showing more flexibility because they classified anyone as Jewish with 3 or more Jewish grandparents. And let's not forget that fascism was quite popular in the US in the 1920s and the 1930s. The Ku Klux Klan, mirroring the fascist movements that were sweeping through Europe, experienced a huge revival in the 1920s. Nazis were embraced by American eugenicists who lauded the Nazi goal of racial, quote-unquote, purity and disseminated Nazi propaganda. Charles Lindbergh, who accepted a swastika medal from the Nazi Party in 1938, along with the evangelist Gerald Winrod's pro-Hitler defenders of the Christian faith, William Dudley Pelley's silver shirts, the initials SS were intentional, and the veteran-based khaki shirts were just a few of our openly fascist organizations. The idea that America is a defender of democracy, liberty, and human rights would come as a huge surprise to those Frantz Fanon calls the wretched of the earth, those who saw their democratically elected governments subverted and overthrown by the United States in Panama in 1941, in Syria in 1949, in Iran in 1953, in Guatemala in 1954, in the Congo in 1960, in Brazil in 1964, in Chile in 1973, in Honduras in 2009, and in Egypt in 2013. And this list does not include a host of other governments that, however despotic, as was the case in South Vietnam, Indonesia, or Iraq, were viewed as inimical to American interests and destroyed, in each case inflicting death and immiseration on millions. For empire is simply the external expression of white supremacy. Now, anti-Semitism alone did not lead to the Shoah. It needed the innate genocidal potential of the modern bureaucratic state. The millions of victims of racist imperial projects in countries such as Mexico, China, India, the Congo, and Vietnam for this reason are deaf to the fatuous claims by Jews that their victimhood is unique. So are Black, Brown, and Native Americans, for they also suffered Holocausts, but these Holocausts remain minimized or unacknowledged by their Western perpetrators. Israel embodies the ethno-nationalist state the far right in the US and Europe dreams of creating for themselves, one that rejects political and cultural pluralism as well as legal, diplomatic, and ethical norms. Israel is admired by these proto-fascists, including Christian nationalists, because it has turned its back on humanitarian law to use indiscriminate lethal force to cleanse its society of those condemned as human contaminants. And Israel is not an outlier. It expresses our darkest impulses, ones being turbocharged by the Trump administration. I covered the birth of Jewish fascism in Israel. I reported on the extremist Meir Kahane, who was barred from running for office and whose Koch party was outlawed in 1994 and declared a terrorist organization by Israel and the United States. I attended political rallies held by Benjamin Netanyahu, who received lavish funding from right-wing Americans and AIPAC when he ran against Yitzhak Rabin, who was negotiating a peace settlement with the Palestinians. Netanyahu's supporters chanted, "Death to Rabin." They burned an effigy of Rabin dressed in a Nazi uniform. Netanyahu marched in front of a mock funeral for Rabin. And of course, Rabin was assassinated on November 4th, 1995, by a Jewish fanatic. Rabin's widow, Leah, blamed Netanyahu and his supporters for her husband's murder. Netanyahu, who first became prime minister in 1996, has spent his political career nurturing Jewish extremists, including Avigdor Lieberman, Gideon Sarar, Naftali Bennett, and others. His father, Ben Zion, who worked as an assistant to the Zionist pioneer Vladimir Jabotinsky, who Benito Mussolini referred to as, quote, a good fascist, was a leader in the Herut Party that called on the Jewish state to seize all the land of historic Palestine. Many of those who formed the Herut Party carried out terrorist attacks during the 1948 war that established the State of Israel. And Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, Sidney Hook, and other Jewish intellectuals described the Herut Party in a statement published in the New York Times as, quote, a political party closely akin in its organization, methods, political philosophy, and social appeal to Nazi and fascist parties. There has always been a strain of Jewish fascism within the Zionist project, one that mirrors the strain of fascism in American society, and unfortunately for us, the Palestinians and the Israelis, these fascistic strains are ascendant. The left is no longer capable of overcoming the toxic ultranationalism that has evolved here. Zev Sternhell, a Holocaust survivor and Israel's foremost authority on fascism, warned. The kind whose European strain almost wiped out a majority of the Jewish people. Sternhell added, we see not just a growing Israeli fascism, but racism akin to Nazism in its early stages. The decision to obliterate Gaza has long been the dream of far-right Zionists, heirs of Kahana's movement. Jewish identity and Jewish nationalism are the Zionist versions of Nazis' blood and soil. Jewish supremacy is sanctified by God, as is the slaughter of Palestinians, who Netanyahu compared to the biblical Amalekites massacred by the Israelis in the Bible. And Euro-American settlers in the American colonies used the same biblical passage to justify the genocide against Native Americans. Enemies, usually Muslims, slated for extinction are subhuman, who embody evil. Violence and the threat of violence are the only forms of communication those outside the magical circle of Jewish nationalism understand. And those outside this circle, including dissident Israelis, are to be purged. Messianic redemption will take place once the Palestinians are expelled. Jewish extremists call for the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest shrine for Muslims, built on the ruins of the Jewish Second Temple, which was destroyed in 70 CE by the Roman army, to be demolished. The mosque is to be replaced by a third Jewish temple, a move that would set the Muslim world alight. The West Bank, which the Zealots call Judea and Samaria, will be formally annexed by Israel, and Israel will be governed by the religious laws imposed by the ultra-Orthodox Shas and United Torah Judaism parties, turning Israel into a version of Iran. There are over 65 laws which discriminate, directly or indirectly, against Palestinian citizens of Israel and those living in the occupied territories. The campaign of indiscriminate killing of Palestinians in the West Bank, many by rogue Jewish militias who have been armed with 10,000 automatic weapons, along with house and school demolitions and the seizure of remaining Palestinian land, is exploding. Israel, at the same time, is turning on Jewish traitors who refuse to embrace the demented vision of the ruling Jewish fascists and who denounce the horrific violence of the state. The familiar enemies of fascism, journalists, human rights advocates, intellectuals, artists, feminists, liberals, the left, homosexuals, and pacifists are targeted. The judiciary, according to plans put forward by Netanyahu, will be neutered. Public debate will wither. Civil society and the rule of law will cease to exist, and those branded as disloyal will be deported. The zealots in power in Israel could have exchanged the hostages held by Hamas for the thousands of Palestinian hostages held in Israeli prisons, which is why the Israeli hostages were seized. And there is evidence that in the chaotic fighting that took place once Hamas militants entered Israel, the Israeli military decided to target not only Hamas fighters, but the Israeli captives with them, killing perhaps hundreds of their own soldiers and civilians. Israel and its Western allies, James Baldwin saw, is headed towards the terrible probability that the dominant nations, struggling to hold on to what they have stolen from their captives and unable to look in the mirror, will precipitate a chaos throughout the world, which, if it does not bring life on this planet to an end, will bring about a racial war such as the world has never seen. I know these killers. I met them in the dense canopies in the war in El Salvador and Nicaragua. It was there that I first heard the single, high-pitched crack of the sniper bullet, distinct, ominous, a sound that spreads terror. Army units I traveled with, enraged by the lethal accuracy of rebel snipers, set up heavy .50 caliber machine guns and sprayed the foliage overhead until a body, bloodied and mangled, dropped to the ground. I saw them at work in Basra in Iraq and, of course, Gaza, where on a fall afternoon at the Netzarim Junction, an Israeli sniper shot dead a young man a few feet away from me. We carried his limp body up the road. I lived with them in Sarajevo during the war. They were only a few hundred yards away, perched in high-rises that looked down on the city. I witnessed their daily carnage. At dusk, I saw a Serb sniper fire around in the gloom at an old man and his wife bent over their tiny vegetable plot. The sniper missed. She ran haltingly for cover. He did not. The sniper fired again. I can see the light was fading. It was hard to see. Then the third time, the sniper killed him. And this is one of those memories of war I see in my head over and over and over and do not like to talk about. I watched it from the back of the Holiday Inn, but by now I have seen it, or the shadows of it, hundreds of times. These killers targeted me, too. They struck down colleagues and friends. I was in their sights traveling from northern Albania into Kosovo with 600 fighters from the Kosovo Liberation Army, each insurgent carrying an extra AK-47 to hand off to a comrade. 3 shots, that crisp crack, too familiar. The sniper must have been far away, or maybe the sniper was a bad shot, although the bullets came close. I scrambled for cover behind a rock. My 2 bodyguards bent over me, panting, the green pouches strapped to their chests, packed full of grenades. I know how killers talk, the black humor, pint-sized terrorists, they say of Palestinian children. And they are proud of their skills. It gives them cachet. They cradle their weapon as if it is an extension of their body. They admire its despicable beauty. This is who they are, their identities, killers. In the hyper-masculine culture of Israel and among our own emergent fascist culture, killers are lauded as exemplars of patriotism, are respected, rewarded, promoted. They are numb to the suffering they inflict. Maybe they enjoy it. Maybe they think they are protecting themselves, their identity, their comrades, their nation. Maybe they believe the killing is a necessary evil, a way to make sure Palestinians die before Palestinians can strike. Maybe they have surrendered their morality to the blind obedience of the military, subsumed themselves into the industrial machinery of death. Maybe they are scared to die. Maybe they want to prove to themselves and others that they are tough, they can kill. Or maybe their mind is so warped that they believe killing is righteous. They, like all killers, are intoxicated by the godlike power to revoke another person's charter to live on this earth. And they revel in the intimacy of it. They see in fine detail through the telescopic sight, the nose and mouth of their victims, the triangle of death. They hold their breath. They pull slowly, gently on the trigger, and then the pink puff, severed spinal cord. It is over. They are numb and cold, but it does not last. I covered war for a long time. I know, even if they do not, the next chapter of their lives. I know what happens when they leave the embrace and comradeship of the military, when they are no longer a cog in these factories of death. I know the hell they enter. It starts like this. All the skills they acquired as a killer on the outside are useless. Maybe they go back. Maybe they become a gun for hire. But this only delays the inevitable. They can run for a while, but they cannot run forever. There will be a reckoning, and it is the reckoning I will tell you about. They will face a choice. Live the rest of their life stunted, numb, cut off from themselves, cut off from those around them. Descend into a psychopathic fog, trapped in the absurd, interdependent lies that justify mass murder. There are killers years later who say they are proud of their work, who claim not a moment's regret, but I have not been inside their nightmares. If this is the route they take, they will never again truly live. Of course, they do not talk about what they did to those around them, certainly not to their families. They are feted as heroes, but they know, even if they do not say it, that this is a lie. The numbness usually wears off. They look in the mirror, and if they have any shred of conscience left, their reflection disturbs them. They repress the bitterness. They escape down the rabbit hole of opioids and alcohol, which is what killed my uncle, who fought in the South Pacific in World War II. Their intimate relationships, because they cannot feel, because they bury their self-loathing, disintegrate. This escape works for a while, but then they go into such darkness that the stimulants used to blunt the pain destroy them. And maybe that is how they die. I have known many who died like that, and I have known those who ended it quickly, a gun to the head. I have trauma from war, but the worst trauma I do not have. The worst trauma from war is not what you saw. It is not what you experienced. The worst trauma is what you did. They have names for it: moral injury, perpetrator-induced traumatic stress. But that seems tepid given the hot, burning coals of rage, the night terrors, the despair. Those around them know something is terribly, terribly wrong. They fear this darkness. But these people do not let others into their labyrinth of pain. And then one day, in desperation, they reach out for love. Love is the opposite of war. War is about death. It is about smut. It is about turning other human beings into objects, maybe sexual objects, but I also mean this literally. For war turns people into corpses. Corpses are the end products of war. What comes off its assembly line? So they want love. But death has made a Faustian bargain. It is this. It is the hell of not being able to love. And they carry this death inside them for the rest of their lives. It corrodes their soul. And yes, we have souls. They sold theirs. The cost is very, very high. It means that what they want, what they most desperately need in life, they cannot attain. They spend days wanting to cry and not knowing why. They are consumed by guilt. They believe that because of what they did, the life of a son or daughter or someone they care about is in danger. Divine retribution. They tell themselves this is absurd, but they believe it anyway. They start to include little offerings of goodness to others, as if these offerings will appease a vengeful God, as if these offerings will save someone they care about from harm, from death. But nothing wipes away the stain of murder. They are overwhelmed with sorrow, regret, shame, grief, despair, alienation. They face an existential crisis. They know that all the values they were taught to honor in school, at worship, at their home, are not the values they upheld. They hate themselves. They do not say this out loud. Shooting unarmed people is not bravery. It is not courage. It is not even war. It is a crime. It is murder. And Israel runs an open-air shooting gallery in Gaza and the West Bank, as we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Total impunity, murder, a sport. It is exhausting trying to ward off these demons, and maybe they will make it, being human again. But that will mean a life of contrition. It will mean making the crimes public. It will mean begging for forgiveness. It will mean forgiving themselves, and this is very hard. It will mean orienting every aspect of life to nurturing life rather than extinguishing it. This is the only hope for salvation, and if they do not take it, they are damned. We must see through the empty jingoism of those who use the abstract words of glory, honor, and patriotism to mask the cries of the wounded, the senseless killing, war profiteering, and chest-pounding grief. We must see through the lies the victors do not acknowledge, the lies covered up in stately war memorials and mythic war narratives filled with stories of courage and comradeship. We must see that we must see through the lies, we must see that war is necrophilia. War is a state of almost pure sin, with its goals of hatred and destruction. War fosters alienation. It leads inevitably to nihilism and is a turning away from the sanctity and preservation of life. All other narratives about war too easily fall prey to the allure and seductiveness of violence, as well as the attraction of the godlike power that comes with a license to kill with impunity. The truth about war comes out, but usually too late. We are assured by the war makers that these stories have no bearing on the glorious, violent enterprise the nation is about to inaugurate. And lapping up the myth of war and its sense of empowerment, we prefer not to look. It is vital now, given what we face, that we find within ourselves the courage to name our darkness and repent. This willful blindness and historical amnesia, this refusal to be accountable to the rule of law, this belief that we have a right to use industrial violence to exert our will, marks, I fear, the start, not the end, of campaigns of mass slaughter by the global north against the world's growing legions of poor and vulnerable. It is the curse of Cain, and it is a curse we must remove before the genocide in Gaza becomes not an anomaly, but the norm. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are now going to open up for questions. So please come over on this side for your questions.
Thank you. Hello, Chris. I was kind of curious. I haven't really heard much in the way of anyone else talk about this other than Max Blumenthal, for instance, that the two blue stripes on the Israeli flag are for the two rivers, the Nile and the Euphrates, and he said something about the Greater Israel Project is from not the river to the sea, but from the river to the other river, and I'm just wondering, like, that would include Egypt, Iraq, Kuwait, like the rest of Syria, the rest of Lebanon, I'm sure a few others I can't even think of. Like, I'm just curious, based on your experience, is that true? What do you have to say about that?
So you're right that there have been Zionists who have proposed maps of a greater Israel, which does incorporate huge swaths of the Levant. What we've seen with the expansion of Greater Israel is that it's been incremental. Of course, 1967, they took Gaza, the West Bank. They have not withdrawn from southern Lebanon. They took the buffer zone, not only took the buffer zone on the Golan Heights, including Mount Hermon, but have also created or said that they are going to enforce a demilitarized zone in Syria south of Damascus. So that's certainly within the DNA of the Zionist project, that they expand. And of course, we've seen, if you take all of that territory together, including the fact that they're seizing Gaza, and really moving very aggressively to try and seize the West Bank, I don't know where it's going to stop. I mean, Jordan is actually the big one. Jordan and Jordan is very, very worried.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's the first time I've heard anyone talk in depth about snipers. I read the 1999 Martin Luther King assassination conspiracy trial and William Pepper's 3 books. And in working on a narrative version of it, it appears that there were at least 7 snipers on the ground. 3 military, 3 clan-based, and 1 police. Which brings you, if you're thinking about such things, to the mystery, of what drives these people. And you mentioned fascism. I know you've read Klaus Teweleit. It's still kind of mysterious. And I'm glad to hear you think that there is a hell on earth faced by people who make that decision. Thanks.
Yeah, you pay for it. You pay for it. I mean, what drives them is they don't think of them as human. I mean, look at the rhetoric that the Zionists use to describe the Palestinians. They've essentially canceled them from any human consideration. And that process of dehumanizing, which we're watching the Trump administration do now to undocumented workers, but they're not going to stop with undocumented workers, that linguistic dehumanization then creates a kind of psychological condition where you can kill and you don't really look at them as human. Yeah.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for that. You mentioned this culture of violence that venerates violence, celebrates it, and it brought to mind an event recently in which Daniel Penny, the murderer of Jordan Neely on the subway, after being acquitted, was hired by Andreessen Horowitz, which is a financial. Oh, I'm sorry. Daniel Neely, the man who murdered Jordan. Or I'm sorry, Daniel Penny, the man who murdered Jordan Neely, was acquitted and then hired by Andreessen Horowitz without any previous experience in finance. It seemed like a sort of cartoonish, overt version of that celebration of violence. Like, there's no other reason I could imagine to hire him other than to venerate the act. And maybe it's just one example, but I wonder if you could speak to it and just how extreme we could expect that to become.
Well, I think we're moving at a very swift pace towards an authoritarian police state. This is very different from the first Trump administration. Trump was disorganized. He kept hiring people who obstructed his own fascistic vision. Trump is, of course, intellectually very limited and has no real ideology other than unadulterated greed, but the people around him do. And that ideological void is being filled with Christian fascists, and I wrote a book about them, American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War in America, and I speak as a divinity school graduate who grew up in the church. These people are heretics. They have misused the Christian religion to sacralize the worst aspects of white supremacy, imperialism, and capitalism, and the liberal church never called them out, which always mystified me, probably why they and most other liberal institutions are so irrelevant. But yeah, we're seeing a veneration of, but let's be clear, white violence. You know, if the Palestinians, the Ukrainians employ violence against the Russians, then they're feted as heroes. But if Palestinians employ violence against their occupiers, they are demonized as terrorists. It's what Chomsky called this bifurcation between worthy and unworthy victims. So worthy victims are celebrated, unworthy victims are demonized for the same act. I mean, I was in El Salvador covering the war for 5 years, and the church women, they were killed shortly before I got there. The church women were killed and raped and murdered, and the Reagan administration, Jeane Kirkpatrick and Haig and others discredited them. Oh, they weren't really church people. They were, you know, tied with the rebels or whatever. And at the same time, a Polish Catholic priest was killed by the communist regime and for supporting Solidarity, and he was held up as a martyr at the very same moment. And that's, of course, what you're seeing. So there already is a celebration of white vigilante violence, including, of course, all the people on January 6th who were freed, pardoned by Trump.
Hello, Chris. Once again, an exceptional, enlightening lecture. I do have one question. I don't even know if it can be answered. I've been reading Thomas Martin and his belief in hope in God, hope in life, in an amoral, immoral world. How do we do it with what's going on?
Well, it's not done in the abstract.
Okay.
So that's dangerous when it's always done in the concrete. And hope is always absurd. And of course, hope is always nonviolent, and hope is always about empathy. So I will give you just an example of what gives me hope. I teach in the prison system in New Jersey in the college degree program offered by Rutgers. And one of my students was incarcerated at the age of 14 for a crime he did not commit. He was illiterate. Both his parents were dead. He was living on the streets of Camden, New Jersey. He was hauled in and made to sign a confession for a murder. He couldn't read it. And he got to court, and when he heard the charges, he tried to protest, and it didn't do any good. And he was sentenced as an adult. He's 14 years old. He weighed 90 pounds. He was sentenced as if he was an adult, and he was not eligible to go before the parole board until he was 70 years old. That doesn't mean he'd get out. It means he couldn't even ask to get out till he was 70. He went into the prison illiterate. He went through the GED. He got into the college program. He was my best student. He took an A in every class I taught. And after one class, the bell goes, and you got to get to the hall quickly or you get a charge. But he waited till the classroom was empty, and he turned to me and he said, "I know I'm going to die in this prison, but I work as hard as I do because one day I'm going to be a teacher like you." That's hope. That's hope. I can live on that for a really long time.
Chris. What an honor. I was watching your appearance on Brianna Joy Gray's Bad Faith podcast from a few weeks ago. Toward the end of your discussion, the subject of, I think broadly speaking, what the left should do in this moment of fascist ascendancy. And you seem to be a bit impatient with her notion that online organizing could be an effective channel. Do you have any other suggestions or observations on how best, in your mind, the left can reassemble, reinvigorate itself in this moment?
Well, this is what Sanctuary does. It's why I drove up here. You have to create physical community. You can't do it online. And community will become vital. And that community, one built on inclusiveness, tolerance, compassion, has to become manifest around you. And in despotic societies, expressing compassion or empathy is a subversive act. But yeah, no, we're not. If you think you're doing activism online, you're actually just doing exactly what the corporate state wants. You're alone in your room in front of a screen, fooling yourself. Yeah, it's got to be physical, and we've got to build mass movements that obstruct the machine. And it's not going to be pretty, because these people are going to be, they're already vicious, but they're going to be even more vicious. And the one weapon we have to cripple them is, because we have the numbers, is the strike. And we have to, there was just a national strike in Greece. We have to begin to organize to strike, to shut it down. Don't think that going out and voting for it, as Emma Goldman said, if voting was that effective, it'd be illegal. So yeah, that's what we have to do. But spaces like this are really, really important, and you're very blessed to have it here in Troy.
Thank you, Chris. You spoke quite a bit about, I guess you could call it the more intimate forms of imperial violence in the form of the sniper and a few others, and the psychological costs of that. I was wondering if you could speak a bit on the more depersonalized, I suppose, forms of imperial violence, the artillery, the air. At this point, we have drone operators sitting in air-conditioned trailers on the other side of the planet. I was wondering what the effect of that is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I was covered the first Gulf War, so I mean, I saw the little computer screens and on these sophisticated artillery devices, and you see all the little red dots, and then the flash, and then there's no little red dots, and all the human beings are dead. So, although we do see with drone operators that even though they're sitting in an air-conditioned room in Nevada, blowing people away. We know from Daniel Hale's leak of the drone papers that, of course, a huge percentage, most of them were civilians. But even that depersonalized killing can have a cost. But yeah, and of course, you didn't bring up AI. So many of the Palestinians who are targeted or selected for assassination are picked out by AI now. And you can thank Google for that. So yeah, that impersonalized killing makes it easier to kill. Yeah.
It's an honor to hear you speak. Been following you for a long time, and I really appreciate that you've made the trip up here. I'm a writer about an hour east in the Berkshires. I was shocked that when I started writing about Palestine v. Israel, that I lost tremendous amounts of support, financial support, and also people just fleeing subscribership. It was very shocking because my audience is mostly liberal, artsy, cultural type people, and that really blew me away. Made me feel very alone And I would like your take, what your instincts tell you, we're going to be looking at in the future, although we haven't heard the words journalists are enemies of the people yet this term. I don't think Trump has said that. He has said it in the past, and I'm wondering how dangerous you think it might be to be a journalist who is not letting go of the story of Palestine and Israel.
Well, I think the Zionists and their supporters have done a very effective job in cowing the establishment media. They, of course, have, in a coordinated effort, essentially outlawed free speech on university campuses across the country, persecuting the students who, along with a few groups like the Great Jewish Voice for Peace, are our nation's conscience. I mean, we're talking about a condemnation of genocide. This is the crime of crimes. So I find what's happening on the campuses very ominous. The fact that the media, the legacy media, has essentially shut down over this issue, or in the case of my old employer, the New York Times, essentially cheerled the genocide. I mean, the low point was when they wrote an editorial saying there shouldn't be a ceasefire. So no, there's no question that a friend of mine, Richard Medhurst, was just raided. His apartment was raided. His studio, all his electronic equipment was seized from him in Vienna, and he's facing a 14-year prison sentence. They're charging him with being a member of Hamas. He's Christian, so I told him, I'm sorry, Hamas wouldn't take you, unless you converted, I guess. So yeah, it's scary, and I mean, people like me are not on the top tier. They're going after. You see it with the, pushing the AP out of the White House, pushing the New York Times out of its workspace in the Pentagon. This kind of. So they're going to go after the Democratic Party and legacy institutions first, but people like me are definitely next. My wife's Canadian, so I can flee to our 51st state.
Talk like this right in here, sorry. It's an honor to meet you. I've tried to come here so many times whenever you're here, and I always miss out. I have a really quick question, and I know they said keep it one, but if I make a quick comment. The question I tell you is just very simple. Do you know of what's the best way to donate, like organization, for Palestinians? I've reached out to different masjids and mosques, so that would be my question. And for the quick comment, I would just urge everybody, if you haven't done so already, to reach out to as many people as possible. It doesn't have to be a big gesture, it could be anything. Within the last 2 years, all over the world, I've reached out to at least 500 groups, religious, mystical, political, all types of minorities, everyone. I've gone to the masjids out here, the mandiras of the Hindus, reached out to every indigenous tribe, over 100. And the point I'm saying by this is, every little thing helps, and even if it's just like doing something small, bringing food for a neighbor, or reaching out to someone you normally wouldn't, because that's literally like any little thing helps, and it creates a huge wave. I mean, I was in Honduras right before the coup, in 2008, a year before, and even then I was organizing, talking to ex-guerrilleros, the guerrillas of the 80s and 90s. I was going against the cops. I was not scared of the death squads, and I was inspiring all these other people to do it. And they said, you're an American, you come from the North, and you're putting your life on the line. And to me, it was just like, this is what you have to do. But anyways, I just wanted to keep that comment. Hope, like you said, is a huge thing. But again, my main question is, what's the best way to donate to the Palestinians? Thank you.
So I give money to the Palestine Children's Defense Fund, because I know it. So yeah, that's who I support. And you're right about small acts of kindness, standing up. We're organizing, I'm sure you are here too, in Princeton against ICE. It's really, it's that old biblical injunction. It's not about us, it's about our neighbor. And in times like these, when you stand up for your neighbor, it becomes a political act and a dangerous one. But that's what we have to do. And you're only going to find the strength to do that if you're in community with other people who do it with you. You need that community. You need that, to use a church term, ecumenical space. And, that act of kindness. If you haven't read Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, read it. It's probably one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, arguably the greatest novel in Russian of the 20th century. He was the great war correspondent and then wrote the novel after the war, and I'm just going to read a little because your comment reminded me of that. This is from Life and Fate. I have seen that it is not man who is impotent in the struggle against evil, but the power of evil that is impotent in the struggle against man. The powerlessness of kindness, of senseless kindness, is the secret of its immortality. It can never be conquered. The more stupid, the more senseless, the more helpless it may seem, the vaster it is. Evil is impotent before it. The prophets, religious teachers, reformers, social and political leaders are impotent before it. This dumb, blind love is man's meaning. Human history is not the battle of good struggling to overcome evil. It is a battle fought by a great evil, struggling to crush a small kernel of human kindness. But if what is human in human beings has not been destroyed even now, then evil will never conquer.
Can you repeat the title, please?
It's Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. It's a brilliant book. Along with Moby Dick, written not far from here.
Yeah, The Intercept today said that Moby Dick is not a novel, and pushed me a little further.
Who said that?
The Intercept on there, it was their headline.
It's not a novel? What is it?
It's a nonfiction book, that we need to study it as a nonfiction epic.
You know what C.L.R. James said about Moby Dick, and he was right, is that it's about the collapse of a civilization.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they were implying.
Yeah,
exactly. I wanted to make a comment about how you talked about the pain of being a killer, and I knew many people who went to Vietnam. None of them, by their choice, came back screaming through the night, and I don't often hear about that spoken publicly, how that's a reality of life. And I loved you with Mark Lamont Hill yesterday. Last week. But the question I want to have is, as this roller coaster of, from October of 23 events, and I've found myself getting all Pollyanna-ish, there'll be a meeting in the Security Council, and I'll be, oh, yeah, and then the U.S. vetoes and all that, especially when Russia was voting for the ceasefires. But here was the Arab Summit. There's a lot of money, as Trump and the gangsters like to say, on the table, right? Is there any hope with this much there's power there, there's money there, they're getting together. I don't know, and I'm reading the Damascus events because Marwan Bashara recommended that to understand some of what this Arab community, and as you referred to the Levant, is really moving out of that period in mid-1800s. This country is not very far out of mid-1800s. Melville and the Transcendentalists, they got it. No slavery. No, don't pollute. Anyway, but my question is about the Arab Summit.
Oh, I was in Cairo, about to go to Cairo again. I've been in the Middle East quite a bit since the genocide began, and this will be my third trip to Cairo. But was in the West Bank this summer. I was in Jordan. I've done 2 trips to Qatar to do broadcasting for Al Jazeera, and I was in Cairo with Nasser's former Minister of Information, who Sadat threw in prison for 10 years, and he said Israel can do what it does, not because it's strong, but because the Arab regimes are weak. And I think that's right. The Arab regimes, Jordan, Egypt, they're either broken or they're client regimes. And why haven't they done trade embargoes? Why are hundreds of trucks filled with produce to circumvent the disruption of maritime traffic? The only country that's actually stepped up to try and obstruct the genocide is Yemen. And this is why the Arab regimes are terrified, because they're fragile, including in Saudi Arabia. Why protests in support of the Palestinians are outlawed, because it would very swiftly morph into anti-regime protests. So this is really destabilized. And even Egypt, which gets all sorts of support from us. I don't know, it's $1.5 billion in military aid a year or something. Even they have been categorical. No one's going to the Sinai. Because it just would put the livelihood of the regime in jeopardy. Unfortunately, I don't see anything to stop Israel. The only way Israel will be stopped is if we stop them, because some 70% of their munitions at this point come from us. And we're not going to stop them. And let's not sugarcoat it. Biden is as bad. The only difference between Trump and Biden is that Trump is, more honest, not because he's honest, but because he doesn't have any of that veneer, Biden, Blinken, they all knew what Israel's end goal was. It wasn't a secret. And they kept funneling all sorts of support and weapons to them to achieve that. So I'm very bleak about where we're headed. We still must do everything within our power to resist. And my next book will be on Gaza, which I'm doing with a cartoonist, Joe Sacco, who did the books Palestine and Footnotes in Gaza. Because he is an artist, I as a writer, it's our tiny contribution to this attempt at erasure. Not just the physical erasure of the Palestinians, but the cultural and historical erasure. And, that we must, employ everything that we have to essentially fight against. My publisher, Simon & Schuster, that's made significant money off of my books, hundreds of thousands of dollars, has already told me they don't want the book because they don't want the blowback. When we talk about censorship, they don't even want to look at the proposal because they don't want to deal with it.
Hi, Chris. Thank you again for another wonderful speech. My question is, you've been around the block with the Middle East a lot. What do the Israelis fear from the Palestinians? Clearly, in the Palestinian state and the Palestinian freedom, clearly we're losing our rights here to stay quiet and not to divest or sanction or anything. The students are losing their rights. We should all be up in arms, but somehow I feel like they have the truth to fear, which is written all over the Palestinians. But what do you think the Israelis fear from the Palestinians in giving them their freedom?
It's actually kind of a complex question because all settler colonial projects rewrite history. We do it. And they rewrite history, you'll hear it, the Palestinians have no national identity, or there weren't any there, and because it creates to face the truth. We haven't faced the truth in this country about what we have done and what we do to African Americans, Native Americans. We live in a system of apartheid. Walk out the street. Undocumented workers live in a state of segregated. I live in Princeton. You know, 20 minutes away is Trenton. It's a segregated society, it's a segregated state. So societies have, all societies, including us, have an extremely hard time facing the truth. And Israel's national myth precludes, you know, the recognition of Palestinian rights to the land. And then they're indoctrinated. And that's why you're watching this aggressive effort to take control of public education. So the Israeli historian Ilan Pappé wrote a very good article several years ago about how that indoctrination or the Zionist indoctrination in Israel began in primary school. Well, that's of course what they want to do. That's why they're going after DEI and all this stuff, because what they want to do is bring back that celebration of the white supremacist, the white myth. I mean, that's why I threw in there, you know, the thing about the Western canon. But Israel has already done that. So Israel, there's total, half of Israel or more hates Netanyahu, but there's no dispute over the genocide. They're all full supporters of the genocide. And boy, let's go back to the Iraq War, which I denounced, and the rage that engendered. I mean, I came into the office at the New York Times and my phone bank was filled with death threats, and there weren't more because they ran out of space. I mean, you know, we're no different. We have the same, I mean, that war was a crime. It was illegal. It was a criminal act. But this country drank deep from that very dark elixir of the poison of nationalism. You know, to speak out against that war in that time was, I mean, I lost my job. There are very, very few of us. Well, that's also true in Israel. So, and that's why education is important, and that's why fascist systems, waste no time in seizing educational institutions and turning them into systems of indoctrination. And it's scary. I mean, once in totalitarian societies, the last readout where free speech is sacrosanct are usually on college campuses or university campuses. That doesn't exist in our country anymore. You can't. And that's really, really ominous. And these university administrations could not drop to their knees fast enough. I mean, it's not surprising for anybody who's read the history of Weimar Germany in the early years of the Nazis. And then you have all sorts of people who should know better on the left cheerleading Trump because he's dismantling the deep state. I don't know how anyone can look at Elon Musk and think he has your interests at heart, or Peter Thiel, or Larry Ellison, or anyone else. They always seize the bureaucratic structure and impose loyalists. And the object is that, you know, the Trump White House can commit crimes, but everybody at the Justice Department pays complete fealty to the leader. So there's no enforcement. That's what this is about. It's about every fascist regime seeks to purge the bureaucracy. Stalin did it. It took the Bolsheviks a few years to, but if you go back and look from 33 to 38 in fascist Germany, there were all sorts of rearguard battles. The courts, in the courts, the press was almost universally hostile to the Nazis, just in the same as us. But it's a rearguard action, and it's not good for us because the only mechanism we have, because we're disempowered, only about 10% of the American workforce is unionized, and most of them are public service, public employees, so they can't strike, like the railroad freight workers. We're in real trouble, but we're replicating that pattern.
University-related observations for your comments. One is the purging of university presidents by a committee led by Elsa Stefanik, our local congresswoman here, now to lead the United Nations.
Is she from here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. You know, we're not proud of it. And but the other thing is, well, she's able to, you know, bait for university presidents into Harvard, MIT, Columbia, you know, University of Pennsylvania. The other, you know, generally on, you know, campuses. I'm on one campus here, and traditionally we have the student newspaper. And in the past, you know, faculty contribute, students contribute issues at a time. Right after that, October 6th, where there was no opinions or letters related to it, and there's also kind of a new rules to prevent any kind of demonstrations on campus. So the effect is pretty much a suppression of even discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the university presidents essentially groveled, and they just didn't grovel enough. What they should have done is gone in and denounced apartheid and genocide. They were going to go up in flames anyway. They might as well go up in flames holding up morality. You don't grovel in front of these people. That's the wrong tactic. It is. I mean, they'll always get you in the end, but don't go down like that. And it was just kind of pathetic on the part of the presidents. And they didn't realize the game was fixed, no matter what they said.
Thank you, everyone. We have a few more questions, so I think we'll have to stop it after these next few folks.
Hi, Chris. Thank you again. One question, also about campus activism, is that a lot of the activism directed toward Palestine has had a great focus on just funding and investments. And has there been any discussion regarding the actual armaments that get sent from our country to Israel? I think Watervliet is the closest here.
So MIT and Princeton have published reports that detail the collaboration, including in MIT, where they're working in the robotics department on militarized drones that are used by Israel in Gaza. Both have published reports on that. You know, but the Israeli military, the U.S. military, they're all deeply embedded in all of these universities, including RIT, of course. So, but those two schools have published reports that have, you know, laid out the complicity, not just in terms of investments, but actually doing research on behalf of the Israeli military.
I'm just going to interject because that question actually came from me. Across the river from here is the Watervliet Arsenal, and there were some rumors that many of the 2,000-pound bombs being dropped in Gaza were from that source. Some people that I know ran a FOIA request. They haven't gotten a response. So we're looking for that kind of confirmation in terms of, you know, where the weaponry that's being sent over there comes from, if there's anything nearby, that kind of thing.
Thanks for cheering us up today, Chris. It's interesting you mentioned unionization, or the decline of unions, and I noticed in Utah that the state voted to not allow police, firemen, and teachers to collective bargain. And I wondered, that wasn't my question really, but I couldn't read that without thinking that privatization of law enforcement is the end game for a lot of these people. But, so maybe you want to comment on that.
Yeah, we've already seen that. I mean, they want to privatize everything because it's a very effective tool to break unions. So for instance, Camden, New Jersey, they fired the entire police force and then brought in outside contractors, outside contracts to break the union. And that's very much what's all of this purging of the deep state is about. It's about Karl Marx wrote about it. He said in the last stage of capitalism, the capitalists actually cannibalize the very structures, social and governmental structures that made them rich. And they bring about the collapse. But I looked at this election as really a choice between corporatists, represented by Biden and Harris and the Democratic Party, and oligarchs. Oligarchs and corporatists want different things. Corporatists want a certain amount of stability, they want trade deals, because they make investments to produce physical products, and those investments can take time before they generate profit. Oligarchs, private equity firms would be the classic example. They want chaos. They want things to break down, because the more things break down, the more they can set up toll booths. That's what Amazon is. He doesn't make anything, Bezos. But if you want to get it, you got to pay him. That's why they drive cities into bankruptcy, and they sell off their sewer systems, their water systems, their electrical systems, their parking authority. Anyway, our horrendous for-profit medical and pharmaceutical industry, it's all about, and so oligarchs love that, what Bannon calls the deconstruction of the administrative state, because you're right, it all gets privatized. So if society breaks down, you need private security, you need gated communities, you need all sorts of things, and they're going to fleece you for you to get it.
Well, my question actually that I brought here before I heard you was, while the oligarchs and the neoliberal empire are fighting it out together, there's got to be weak points where people like everybody here can actually take some action, and maybe you have some insight on what those weak points are and what to do about it.
Yeah, there's one weak point, and that is that we have the numbers. And if we mobilize and organize, we can throw a wrench into the system. And that's our job. There's a great quote by the anarchist Herzl, who is telling another bunch of anarchists, you think we're the doctors, we're the disease. We're not here to fix it, we're here to destroy it. We're here to overthrow it. I'll say that again in case there's someone from Homeland Security here. It's called to overthrow it. It's our job to bring it down. The system's not reformable. The Democratic Party is not reformable. I've spent the last 15 years writing books that kept saying that there is a tremendous price, political, not just economic, price to pay for this social inequality and this savagery on the working class or the working poor. And that's Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, America the Farewell Tour, Days of Destruction, Days of Revival, and of course now here we are. But we need to regain the militancy of our forefathers and foremothers who built a very powerful socialist movement at the turn of the 20th century that Woodrow Wilson destroyed, unrepentant racist, by the way. And we need to regain that militancy and to hold fast to those moral imperatives. Julian Benda in The Treason of the Intellectuals writes that you get a choice in life. You can serve privilege and power, or you can serve justice and truth. But the more you serve, if you serve justice and truth, the more you make compromises to those who serve privilege and power, the more you diminish the capacity for justice and truth. It's not our job, Karl Popper writes about this in the Open Society's Enemies, it's our job to hold power accountable, or I would even say it's our job to make power fearful. That's our job. And that's what we've got to start doing if we're going to save ourselves.
Hi. Thank you, Chris, for being here. I know this is your 10th time presenting here. We're going to just quickly do a quick announcement and then do the last 3 questions. But hi, I'm Melissa Badalin, North Troy neighbor, long-time sanctuary volunteer, and new to the sanctuary board. And I just wanted to thank you all for being here, being part of this community, doing this organizing at this very important time with us. And I wanted to also mention that we are screening No Other Land on March 20th. So I hope you come back and keep organizing with us. And then there's a lot of other ways that you can be involved. You can donate, you can be a sustainer, you can volunteer, and then you can just keep showing up, because we have a ton of events this spring that start with critical conversations like this, discussions, organizing for action, as well as celebrating and kind of acts of joy as a form of resistance and resilience that we all know we need right now. So I'm cutting this a little short so we can get to the rest of the questions, but thank you again for being here.
I wanted to thank you for what you read tonight. It was really too low? Better? I wanted to thank you tonight for what you read for us. It was really beautiful, and thank you for coming tonight. I also wanted to echo agreement about getting together, like as a community and striking. But my question is, during Trump's congressional speech that happened recently, he mentioned getting Greenland no matter what. I wanted to ask if you had any comments or thoughts on that, especially with regards to climate change.
Well, I mean, not just Greenland, Canada. You know, he's not joking. He wants the water. He wants the mineral resources. As the climate breaks down, as resources become scarcer and scarcer, these climate fortresses will become more aggressive, not only in terms of keeping people out, not only in terms of repression, but also in terms of seizing resources from their neighbors. I don't think it's a joke. I mean, the New York Times actually ran a story today they said, you know, internally, which wasn't reported, Canada has 25% of North America's freshwater supply. I remember Margaret Atwood telling me years ago, there'll be a war because the Americans will come for our water. But we are headed towards a world where life will become desperate. It already is desperate for many in the global south. And my wife sent me that little thing from the article, and I wrote back, well, we know which side she's Canadian. We know which side we're on. But yeah, it's not a joke. It's really scary. It's a scary time. And, you know, I don't know what the Democrats think or what they're doing or why they're passive, or I think because they're bankrupt myself, I don't think there's anything left. But, you know, we can't rely on them. We got to rely on ourselves.
Chris, thank you very much for coming tonight. I've been following your work for quite a while now, and very honored to hear you speak here tonight. You're a very astute observer of political trends, and actually my question is related to that previous person who asked, which is, I'm glad you brought up tonight that killing, violence, war doesn't just start right away. It starts with first dehumanizing a person into an object before then you can then do what you do or do what this person does. And then it starts with propaganda, right? Education propaganda. And then it starts in other ways before the actual bullets start flying, right? So propaganda, sanctions, economic wars, tariffs, etc. We're seeing that now happening against China, right? Or primarily against China, but with Trump, with lots of people, well, lots of countries. So there is a thought process, or there's commentary that Trump and his team of neo-fascists are interested in shutting down the Ukraine or Russia war as quickly as possible so that they can refocus their efforts on China. And Trump also doesn't seem very enthusiastic about joining Israel in going after Iran either. He seems to have tamped that down a little bit as well. And that's also because all these neo-fascists in his administration are interested in focusing completely on going in a war with China, a physical, kinetic war with China. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, his administration is filled with, so-called China hawks. That's true. But that's not just Trump. I mean, that was Biden. I mean, the whole military Pentagon has been orienting towards aggressive posturing towards China, expanding, in essence, NATO to the South Pacific. I mean, imagine if Chinese warships were running up and down the coast of California, which is, of course, what we're doing in the South China Sea. So that predates Trump, yeah. I think that the reason he's trying to end the war in Ukraine is because he loves Putin. That's who he wants to be. Putin has created a pretty dirty little fascist state. Talk about education, talk about, this. It's all about patriarchy. So, of course, they go after GBLTQ, which Trump is doing. He just, already declare there's only two sexes, a man and a woman or something. So I think that he wants to build an alliance with Putin. I think he admires Putin. I mean, I didn't support the arming of Ukraine. I thought it was insane. It was a proxy war. It was never winnable for the Ukrainians. We baited Russia. I mean, Putin's guilty, of course, but we provoked it. Expanding NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany. I was in Germany when the wall fell. I was in Berlin. And I was there at the press conferences with Hans-Dietrich Genscher, who was the German foreign minister, and Secretary of State James Baker. They couldn't unify Germany without the acquiescence of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev. And the deal was, we will not expand NATO beyond Germany. And once the Soviet Union fell, you heard all this talk of a multipolar world. There were billions of dollars to be made, reconfiguring the Warsaw Pact countries to be with military equipment that was compatible with NATO. We kept pushing and pushing and pushing, but there's a memo that WikiLeaks put out, written by William Burns, who became Biden's head of the CIA, but was the ambassador in Moscow, U.S. ambassador, who said it doesn't matter what the political persuasion is in Russia, nobody supports incorporating Ukraine into NATO. That's a red line. Why is it a red line? Because that's how Napoleon invaded Russia. That's how Russia was invaded in World War I. That's how Russia was invaded in World War II. There's this legitimate historical trauma. But yeah, I think that you're right, that the focus is China. But I don't think that is really any different from the Biden administration. Their focus was also China. Yeah.
We have to stop that because that could go terminal.
Well, of course we have to stop it. Well, you know how we stop it? We have to, all this thing about cutting, firing federal workers, it's nothing if you don't slash the defense budget, which is $1 trillion a year. It won't make any difference. So what we have to do is destroy the Pentagon. We have to, Karl Liebknecht on the eve of World War I, the great German socialist who was killed with Rosa Luxemburg assassinated, called the German military the enemy from within. And that's, and when you read Arnold Toynbee and he talks about how empires die, how they fall, he argues that the key factor is uncontrolled, rampant militarism. Thucydides says the same thing in the history of the Peloponnesian War. That in Thucydides' words, the tyranny that Athens imposed on others, it finally imposed on itself. And that I mean, the Republicans in Congress have a bill to increase military spending by $100 billion over the next decade. So that is the issue. That's what, and if we don't destroy the arms industry and the Pentagon, I mean, what have they done? Just one military fiasco after another. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and who's held accountable? Not only are they not held accountable, these generals, but then they all go sit on the Rand Corporation or Halliburton or become trustees, or Mark Milley's at Princeton right now. So they're not held. Nobody's held accountable. There's no, and so they just leap from debacle to debacle, and that you're right. But the only way to stop it is to slash the military spending. I mean, we spend more in terms of GDP on our military than the next 10 countries combined, including Russia and China. And that's why our country's fallen apart.
Hi, Chris. Nice to be here. Thank you for being here with us. So just a quick last question. You talked earlier about our two of our greatest powers are in our connecting in person and also in strike. And I just would like to hear more about what that would mean, what that looks like, resources to help to guide us on strike.
Well, the two industries that are the top priority for unionization are Walmart and Amazon. So the priority are, those two. And they have aggressive anti-strike measures, including whole anti-strike teams put in place to prevent it. But that's where we start because they're such huge employers. So, yeah, that's where we start. So good luck.
We'll end it there. I do have a quick question, but first I want to say thank you so much for coming here again, as was mentioned. 10th visit. Having you here is incredible, and the documentation, these videos, brings us a lot of exposure. We really appreciate you platforming the sanctuary. As was mentioned earlier, we can't keep this place open without the support of you all. So thank you so much. You can check our events out on your way out. We've got all these flyers and a donation bucket. Olivier is back there. She'd be happy to tell you about what's coming up. And as we were speaking downstairs, and was mentioned, we have some critical conversations coming up. And I did hear from Renee Mafifi, who is our master's student from UAlbany, who is doing the critical conversation on journalism. She regrets not being able to be here. So I'll just end on that question of, what do you think is a journalist's role in upholding democracy?
Well, having worked for the New York Times for 15 years, there are two types of journalists. There are stenographers of power. I don't consider them journalists, but they're feted and win lots of awards and do very well at institutions like the New York Times, following around the Secretary of State or interviewing the titans of Wall Street or rewriting press releases. Journalism for me is about holding power accountable. It is about, and by holding power accountable, it means lifting up the voices and the experiences of those power oppresses. And that's why my entire career was in the Global South. And it was in places most other New York Times correspondents did not want to go. The war in Salvador, 7 years in the Middle East, much of that time in Gaza. The war, I covered the war in Yugoslavia. I was based in Sarajevo, which in fact, every single bureau chief in Europe of my paper, of the New York Times, signed a letter saying they wouldn't go there. I mean, admittedly, it was very dangerous. But that's for me what journalism is about. So the great journalists in this country held power accountable. Ida B. Wells, who exposed the lie of lynching, that they were lynching black men who attacked or assaulted white women. well, anybody who's read the history of the South understands that there were a lot of rapists in the South, but they were white men. And what she documented was that it was in fact the black elite, the black intellectuals, the black store owners, the black doctors, they were the ones who, because whites feared them and feared competition. I.F. Stone, I have heroes, and those are real journalists. My colleagues at Aretz, Gideon Levy and Amira Haas, are amazingly courageous journalists who have dedicated their lives to lifting up the voices of the Palestinians. Amira lived many, many years, well, not only in Gaza, but in Ramallah, and I was in Ramallah this summer. And so that's Robert Fisk, and read The Great War for Civilization. His book on the Middle East is probably the best history of the modern Middle East. So yeah, but we have, but believe me, all these people on MSNBC and CNN, they're not journalists. Journalists do not make, like Rachel Maddow, $10 million a year. I can assure you, real journalists do not. They're entertainers. So, yeah, but it's a good question because many, of course, the corporate structures will attempt to pass these people off as journalists. But they're just courtiers to power, masquerading as journalists. I have zero respect for them. In fact, I have utter contempt for them. Yeah, of course. Rush Limbaugh, when I was booed off of a commencement stage for denouncing the war in Iraq, Rush Limbaugh dedicated 4 straight days every hour to lynching me in the same way that they lynched my great friend Jeremiah Wright, who Obama betrayed. Yeah, that's what they do. They lynch you. They turn you into a pariah. So, yeah, but they're, these people are really amoral, servants of the most nefarious centers of power in the country, which is why they make the money they do. They sold their soul.
Thank you so very much. We really appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks for coming.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. Is that clear? Do you think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, Rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale? get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, Minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.